Welcome to this edition of Decoding Diplomacy. Today we have a special guest, Ambassador Shyam Saran, a veteran diplomat, author, and prolific commentator on foreign policy and global issues. Ambassador Saran is currently president of India International Center. In his long distinguished diplomatic career, Ambassador Saran served as India's Foreign Secretary, Prime Minister's Special Envoy for India-US Civil Nuclear Deal, and Special Envoy and Chief Negotiator on Climate Change. The world is going through an unprecedented churn marked by geopolitical realignments, trade war, and power play. In this conversation, we will try to decode India's relations with two major power centers, the US and China, with Ambassador Shyam Saran.
Begin this conversation. First of all, welcome to this very important conversation we are having. Let me talk about reset. Seems to be the flavor of the season, and we are not only talking. We are talking about a whole lot of resets is being talked about. India-China reset, India-US reset, US-Pakistan reset. So reset seems to be the most trending word in diplomatic lexicon, especially as far as India is concerned. Now, my first question is about Prime Minister recently visited Tianjin towards the end of August. And on August 31, Prime Minister Modi held quote-unquote constructive and forward-looking talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
Yeah.
What is your assessment of the talks? Do you think we are heading for a meaningful reset, or is it mere optics? And there was a narrative change, or that is how it was portrayed as, that India and China are partners, not rivals. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah. So thank you very much for having me on your show. So reset is a very strong word, I would think, that it appears to suggest that there is some kind of a major departure from the past. Number one, it should be recalled that the Tianjin meeting was the second meeting between the two leaders in the last 1 year. The first was at the hard sidelines of the BRICS summit in Kazan in Russia last year. And that meeting itself demonstrated a willingness on both sides to try and normalize the relationship, bring the relationship on track. And that meeting itself was the result of the outcome of several rounds of talks between the two sides at the military level, at the diplomatic level, to try and see whether or not we could make progress on the very tricky issue of the situation at the line of control. Something like 50,000 troops on either side ranged against each other. So what was achieved during those rounds of negotiations, which went on for nearly 2.5 years, was that disengagement at the points of confrontation. That disengagement was achieved, which is a very important thing, because further steps of de-escalation, further steps for the troops to go back to their rear areas, that can only follow with the first step. Right. So that first step was achieved. So that brought about the conditions required for the two leaders to meet again. So this is very important, that the meeting in Tianjin was in a sense a continuation of a particular process. Right. So to look at it as some kind of a sudden departure, right, or a sudden response to what may be happening in the rest of the world, that would not be correct. What we can certainly say is that the conversations between the two leaders and the SCO itself was obviously given a certain degree of momentum because of the uncertainty, because of the instability that we see all across the world. So that is how I would look at it.
So a lot of people feel that, analysts say that this particular meeting was, Donald Trump was the elephant in the room, so to say, and it was triggered by the tariff war, and India and China both being at the receiving end Do you agree with that spin or
Well, there is no doubt that the relationship between India and China, or for that matter, between India and Russia, or with other countries in the world, is impacted by the kind of actions which are being taken by President Trump, not only with respect to the trade war, but more importantly, to my mind, the use of commercial instruments for geopolitical ends.
Right.
This is something different. And therefore, I always say that we are looking at what we are describing as a trade war when it is something more than just the trade war.
Right.
So, in that situation, the Chinese are facing a similar situation to us, that there is a certain pressure being put on them using commercial instruments in order to bring about what they want as some change of Chinese behavior. So there is no doubt that not only India and China, but I would say the entire global economy and the entire geopolitical situation has been put in some kind of a churn,
Right.
some kind of a turmoil as a result of the policies being followed by President Trump. So it should come as no surprise that other major powers like India, like China, like Russia should be looking at and should be engaging with each other to see, are there ways in which they can respond to this situation. I would say theoretically at least that closer India-China relations, better cooperation between India and China would enable both countries to meet this challenge, which we see perhaps much more effectively than would otherwise be the case.
I was there in Tianjin for the SEO summit, and I saw this meeting up close. Now, one of the things that stood out was that while the messaging was very positive, when we talk about tangible outcomes, some would say the meeting itself was important. Meeting itself was a big ticket thing to happen. But when we talk about concrete outcomes and progress on issues like de-escalation, are we getting there? Do you think Chinese are seriously interested in de-escalation? Because there is a suspicion that they were moving very slowly and deliberately.
Well, I think we have to wait for action to follow. As I mentioned, it has taken more than 20 rounds of very intensive negotiations between the two sides at the military level, at the diplomatic level, to bring us to the point where we are, which is not, as I said, the best outcome, but it is a limited outcome with a promise of further steps being taken. So I think we should not immediately look for outcomes. What is important is that the two sides have agreed that they should set up a working group to try and see what are the ways in which the current situation can be further stabilized, can be further improved, and even looking for some kind of a early harvest. I'm not quite sure what that early harvest could be, but that particular mention is a forward-looking, approach by both sides. So it would be fair to say that leaders' meetings are always important. And in the context of India-China relations, my own experience has been that even when leaders do not necessarily come out with tangible outcomes, as you mentioned, the very fact that they have met sends a message down both systems that our leaders are interested in a peaceful and friendly relationship. And that messaging is important.
That's right. That was, I think, the big takeaway, as you rightly pointed out. But moving on, one of the issues that figured very prominently was this whole business of bridging trade deficit, which has been now, despite COVID and despite Galwan, bilateral trade has grown to around $125 or $130 billion. And so has trade deficit has also grown exponentially to $100 billion plus. Now, we do not see, again, I'm going to be using tangible movement, and one meeting is probably not enough, and it's a process. But how do you look at, because why I say, because this trade deficit we'll have to live with for some time. given the economic interdependency?
Well, there another way of looking at the trade deficit. After all, why are we buying so
precisely.
much from China? So do
Right.
not forget that many of our own very important export industries, take for example pharmaceuticals, take for example electronic goods. These very much depend upon cheap ingredients, cheap components which we are able to source from China. If that was not available, perhaps our export markets would also be in some way affected. So there is a certain interest that we ourselves have in continuing this relationship, which is why the trade deficit
Right.
has grown.
Right.
Now, that does not mean that this is not a problem.
Right. Right.
This is a problem for the simple reason that with respect to goods in which India is competitive, where we would have expected that there should be a larger market available for Indian goods in China, because it is a very large market.
Right.
There are so many non-tariff barriers. There are so many, other kinds of barriers which prevent, India from. So there is a certain kind of a mercantilist outlook that appears to be there in China, which is not allowing this trade relationship to become more balanced. But of course, some effort is being made to see whether in some not so sensitive sectors in India we could welcome Chinese investment, because if Chinese investment comes of a significant volume, this will balance in some sense, the trade imbalance.
Right. So another important talking point in that meeting was how to enhance people-to-people and cultural connections. You wrote that very insightful book, How China Sees India and the World, and there's so much of cultural and civilizational connections dating back centuries. What do you think should be done to enhance in a tangible way and to widen the arc of interaction across the spectrum?
So we have to be realistic, because when relations are tense at the political level, it almost inevitably interrupts the normal people-to-people relationship, the cultural linkages that you spoke about. So my hope is that now that the relationship seems to be moving in a somewhat more positive direction, there will be greater opportunities for the two countries to really expand their people-to-people relations. So already I think a decision has been taken by the government of India that there will be freer, more liberal, issue of visas, tourist visas. We are, I think, celebrating some anniversary of our diplomatic relations, 75th anniversary. So that could be a very good occasion to try and improve relations at the cultural level, at the level of our people. This is, to my mind, it is indispensable because I think there is very little knowledge, familiarity with India in China.
Right.
And I think the other way around is also true. There may be some experts on China who have a familiarity with what China is all about, but that does not translate into the kind of easy familiarity that should be there between two countries which are Asian countries and which have such a strong historical and cultural connect.
PM was there primarily for the SCO summit. And this SCO summit was the largest gathering of this largest SCO summit, bringing together leaders of 20 countries and 10 international organizations. And the geopolitical context provided added resonance to that meeting. And one of the most famous picture coming from that meeting was Prime Minister Modi, Russian President Putin, and China President Xi Jinping locked in a huddle and sharing a joke and all that, which apparently was aimed at Donald Trump. My larger question is that it's also about mutating world order, and in that, and the regional order. How do you look at the role of the SCO and India's participation? Should India enhance its role in the SCO?
So I don't think we should over-interpret that image of the three leaders, shaking hands with each other and talking to one another. The fact is that India has good relations with Russia. Russia has good relations with China. We are hoping to have better relations with China. So to, in some visual way, suggest that yes, the relations amongst the three important countries is actually improving, it is a good sign. There used to be the RIC, which was Russia, India, and China, and it was a forum for the three countries to meet together, to see what ways in which we can cooperate together. That fell by the wayside, especially after the relations with China became rather tense. Now, we haven't got back to that point yet, So I think there is a keen interest, certainly on the part of Russia, that the RIC should be again, revived. We have been cautious, obviously, and therefore, in a sense, this visual, meeting of the three was some kind of a, okay, we can't revive the RIC, but we can at least show that there is some degree of empathy amongst the three leaders.
Ideally, that's the way it should be, but reality.
Yes, but I think we have to be realistic. We haven't got to the point where we can realistically think in terms of revival of RIC.
Right. And sir, now, one more thing, when we are talking about India-China relations and the road ahead, what do you think we should be cautious of? There is cautious optimism, there is more pragmatism, there is more realism. What is your personal wish list where you think some breakthrough or some movement forward can be achieved?
So one should always be cautious in our relations with China. I think it is always good to be realistic about what the prospects could be. We should also be mindful of the fact that there are between the two countries rather important issues on which we do not agree. And therefore, it will be a fairly gradual process and a sustained progress before we can come to a point where we talk about breakthroughs. I don't think we are at that stage yet. But I would say that in the current geopolitical situation, as far as I can see, India and China, by improving their relations, by having greater understanding with each other, can only gain in terms of their own interests. We are, in a sense, two zones of stability in a geopolitical landscape which is very, very much in turmoil, as I said. To maintain these two zones of stability, and for these two zones of stability in some way to cooperate with each other, to maintain a degree of regional as well as global stability and peace, I think is very important. So, as an idea, it is, of course, almost self-evident. The practical aspect of getting there is probably going to be more challenging.
I'm so glad that you're so positive and future-looking as far as relations with China is concerned. But there is an entrenched constituency of China skeptics in India, which always portray China as India's foremost threat, and there's a touch of paranoia about that. Where do you think this deep suspicion of China comes from? And will that, my larger question is about trust deficit.
Look, in diplomacy, I think trust is a very, very nebulous kind of a concept. More important is whether between the two countries there is a degree of convergence of interests or there is a divergence of interests. Trust will follow if there is convergence. Distrust will follow if there are divergences. So rather than say, oh, India-China relations are not very good because there is a trust deficit. Well, why is there a trust deficit? And you said there are some China skeptics here. I think with good reason, because the record has been such that we have every reason to be, as I said, cautious. So we should not be stressing so much the issue of trust, but we should be trying to see in this relationship, are there any areas of convergence between the two sides on which we can work, even while we recognize, acknowledge that there are differences that we need to work on. That is a more, I think, realistic approach. And I would also like to point out that perhaps the best period in India-China relations was achieved in, say, 2005, when the then Chinese Prime Minister Wen Xiaobao visited India, and a certain consensus was reached between the two leaders. One was, China is not a threat to India, India is not a threat to China. India is a major economic and commercial opportunity for China, okay, and China is likewise a major opportunity for India. There is enough space in Asia and the world for both countries, both powers to rise simultaneously. Secondly, that the significance of India-China relations have now gone beyond the purely bilateral. That there are many global issues on which they have common interests. For example, climate change. For example, cyber security. For example, security of space-based assets. There were several areas where actually it was recognized that India and China, as the two major powers working together, are likely to achieve better results than if they were not. Right? So there was that kind of a consensus which was reached. Obviously, that consensus did not last very long. There was also a agreement that given the fact that there is that significance going beyond the bilateral, we should quickly try and resolve the border issue as soon as possible. And that would enable us to really work on the things that are really important. Now, for various reasons, which will require another interview to explain why this could not be taken forward, but that is the kind of consensus which does not exist at this point of time, and which you have to work towards if we want that the two countries should be seen as partners, not rivals.
So Tianjin meeting is probably moving the narrative in
So
that
it is
direction.
moving in a positive direction, but as I said, there is a tendency sometimes to, for the pendulum to swing from one end to the other. I think we should be mindful of the fact that this is probably going to be a long haul.